On today's episode, is Cole Hutson better than his brother Lane? All coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Oh, welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, joined by Sebastian Hyde, Director of European Scouting and Head Scout for Dobber Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down Cole Hutson's game in detail. He's a younger brother of Lane Hutson, also a left-handed defenseman, also an undersized left-handed defenseman. And also playing for the NTDP in his draft here. We'll talk about his game in detail, start off with the puck skills and the skating in the first segment. We'll move on to the toolkit, the habits, the decision-making in the second segment. And then in our final segment, we'll break down the projection with Cole Hutson, what he ends up being at the NHL level, what his upside is in terms of the best-case scenario, and which team would be the best fit for Cole Hutson at the NHL level. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. And that's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. So visit Indeed.com/locked on to start hiring now. Terms and conditions apply. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you think of the episode, what you think of Cole Hutson, and who you want us to cover next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this, make sure to leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started here with Cole Hutson's profile. Talk me through the size, handedness, team, all that good stuff. Let's get things started right away.
For sure. So Cole Hutson is a 5'10", 159-pound left shot defenseman. He's very young for the draft class as a June 28th, 06 birthday, and he's been the most interesting defenseman out of the NTDP group this year, at least in our eyes so far at Dobber Prospects. Through 43 total games in all competitions with the NTDP U18 team this season, he has logged 11 goals and 38 points through 43 games. The production has been very strong, but there's still been some question marks with his game overall. So let's kick it off with the puck skills here, first and foremost, and talk me through what I think is one of his stronger elements in that category in his passing ability.
Yeah, the passing is great. I love the breakout passing, but what he mainly does is he'll pass out of his zone, follow his pass, and then get the puck back in the neutral zone to gain zone entries. So he's really supportive in transition, which kind of reflects itself through his passing habits, his passing tendencies. But the passing itself is crisp, it's accurate. He cycles pucks really well, and is especially proficient as a passer from the point on the power play. He's been the top power play quarterback all year for the NTDP, pretty much by default. No one else has his level of skill from the blue line, so he's been kind of in that role for the longest while. And when you have Cole Eiserman to your right, ready to receive a pass in his wheelhouse, Cole Hudson's a great partner for that type of player. He's really good at making passes right in the wheelhouse with just the right pace on those passes to kind of hit them with the right timing. And he's able to understand, when a defense is set in front of him on the power play and he's got like all four guys right in front of him, he's really good at passing it quickly to his side, to the half wall for a one-timer. But when he sees that the defense is a bit more stretched out, he also tends to kind of draw a player in and play a pass slowly to his side to give the defense time to shift, and then kind of confuse players, right? So really good at understanding what type of passes to use and what type of scenario. So the passing's really good, but even then there are some limitations to it. He's not a bomb the puck up the ice type of player. He can do it, but it's not as frequent as, for example, with Lane Hutson, who consistently and constantly would find players with bombs of passes through the neutral zone, right on the tape for breakaways and 2-on-1s and those types of things. So I give his passing a 6.5, maybe a 7. But more leaning on the 6.5 side for the moment. Yeah, that would be the strongest of his puck skills, which is kind of the issue, right? A bit with Cole Hutson. But let's talk about the stick handling ability, because it isn't that bad, but it is limited in some aspects, right?
Yeah, it is. Like in my viewing so far this season, there have been flashes of real creativity behind the stick handling in order to access space, and I think that his selection in terms of like the dekes he makes is typically quite strong. He has a good sense of timing of when to pull out what type of move, but the execution there just isn't at the same level as with like your slam dunk first round talent offensive defenseman in this draft class. He can struggle to gain separation through his stick handling ability. And while he does have an unlocked top hand to a certain extent, it hasn't been necessarily consistently fluid either so far this season. So while the stick handling is probably plus level, I'm leaning more towards a 5.5 grade according to our grading scale. But yeah, it's slightly above average. He can flash some really creative plays, but he's not going to necessarily puncture a defensive structure and dangle through all of them, like we've seen Lane Hutson do at the same level of competition when he was a draft eligible.
Yeah, for sure. There's a significant gap there in the ability to shift defenses, to put players on their heels, and to create separation. I feel like Lane Hutson, even in his draft year, was just amazing at that, and that's only grown. I wouldn't say Cole Hudson's amazing at it. He's above average for sure, but not by decent margins. Yeah, I fully agree with the 5.5 assessment there. For the shot, it's kind of the same symptom as Lane Hutson, where he's using his wrister a lot more than his one timer. He's not slapping pucks almost ever. Um, but he gets to the dangerous areas with his stick handling ability when he can. He opens up ice really well and kind of finds that space for himself after making a pass, which makes it so that he can get away with only using his wrister because he's only getting taking shots really from dangerous areas. He's either doing that or floating wristers from the point for tip-ins. So for me, the shot is 5.5 as well. Not in terms of the power, the accuracy, the velocity, any of that, but just the placement and the ability to consistently get to the right areas to take a shot, right? Like that's a lot more what makes Cole Hutson a good scorer. I mean, he has 11 goals in 43 games so far with the NTDP. Um, which isn't outstanding. I mean, Lane Hutson had I think twice the amount of goals in his draft year in the same amount of games. So it's like, yeah, I mean, with it's been a while since I've watched his stats, but yeah, with Lane, like it was really developed in the NCAA though this year is like he's consistently scoring goals off wristers from dangerous areas. He's accessing the slot and all that. I don't see that to the same extent with Cole Hutson. But there's still that same tendency to just kind of use the wrister in that set. But last but not least is skating. I think this is where there's a bit more of a divergence between Cole Hutson and Lane Hutson. And we've talked about Lane Hutson's skating, especially his defensive skating, his pivots as being an issue. That's a bit more exacerbated with Cole Hutson, right?
Yeah, like especially like the backwards skating is really choppy with Cole Hutson. He's been trying to like defend the rush while skating backwards quite a bit this season, but he's been far more
Yeah.
effective while skating forwards in doing so. He's far more adaptable as a forward skater than a backward skater, and as soon as a player gets around him, he really struggles to make up that ground and catch up to the play. So the
Yeah.
skating is definitely a bit of an area of concern. Mechanically, he's a bit erratic. He has a lot of heel kicks as well in his stride, and it's just not necessarily most efficient in terms of retaining energy. But that said, I think that his edge work is decent enough, and there are aspects of the mobility that are solid. Like he's fairly agile at times, but yeah, the overall output I'd say it's like what 4.5, maybe 5 grade in terms of skating.
Yeah.
It's not at the level that you would want an undersized 5'10", 159-pound left shot defenseman to be skating at this age,
Yeah.
ideally, and it will need some work if his NHL projection wants to stay as likely as it has been over the past year.
For sure, and it's still important to keep in mind. I mean, the Hudsons are late growers. Lane's
Yeah,
grown like what 2.5 inches since his draft year. Like we can expect more or less the same from Cole. So I'd
he's
expect him to
younger
get
too.
around. Yeah, exactly. So I'd expect him to get around the 6 foot mark. But yeah, it's still like that skating is a bigger concern for me than Lane Hudson's in his draft year, and Lane Hudson's skating was a concern in his draft year. So it's like where do we go from there? But again, with both of them, it's the same thing. Where like offensively, skating forwards, it's not bad. Like they're pretty fluid. They can create decent speed and separation at times. But even with Cole, like the separation he creates, we're talking a bit before the episode. Like when he does that Hutson inside out move that Lane really loves, he creates less separation with that move than Lane does, right? So that's a bit of a concern as well. But that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get into our second, where we break down the toolkit, the habits, the decision making, more of kind of the intricate stuff within within Cole Hutson's game. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors at Factor.
Eat stress-free this spring with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never-frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Also discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to keep you stay fueled and feel good all day long. What are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. We're celebrating Earth Day all month long. Look out for the Earth Month Eats badge on the menu for our lowest carbon footprint meals. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 and use code LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code LockedOnNHL50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnNHL50 to get 50% off your first box.
Alrighty, so moving on to what we call the mental segment. We'll talk about the toolkit, the habits, and decision making with Cole Hutson. And we can start off with the toolkit here. I think that the skating and the stick handling combine fairly well, but I feel like the skating and passing combine even better. With the skating and stick handling, we mentioned that before, like there's less separation with his moves than his brother or than other kind of offensive defensemen overall. Like he can still shift defensives, draw players in with his skating ability and kind of, open up those lanes. But I feel like it's less of a bona fide high end element of his game than Cole's. But I really like the way that he combines his skating and passing ability. He's always moving laterally and drawing a player in, opening up a new passing lane. Like that's a big part of his game that I've really liked. And for me, like that's a ticket to the next level is his offensive zone play and his ability to open up lanes both on the breakout and in transition and in the offensive zone, right?
For sure. Like I think that's shown the most brightly in my viewings in his play in the neutral zone. He's so effective at drawing players in, making a quick pass into space in order to gain the offensive zone. He's kind of become an entry specialist with the NTDP this season. And while he's a lot more passive in the breakout than he is in generating zone entries, he does have a significant amount of tools that help him so much in creating those small gaps in space that you need to execute those plays at higher speeds as well. So I think, as you mentioned, it's going to serve him really well at the college level, and he'll have to make those plays at a slightly higher pace than he is right now, but that's a typical jump that all players from the USHL have to make when they enter college hockey. But even in the offensive zone, as you mentioned too, right? Like he's really solid at shifting defensive structures, using lateral motion to create those small passing lanes, and he spots those passing lanes really quickly and is not afraid of making a bold pass or daring play in order to exploit that space either. There's definitely an element of dare in his offensive game that has enabled him to be a really productive offensive defenseman with the NTDP this season.
For sure. And yeah, for me, like even though those elements are good, there's not at the level of lanes. That's why he's kind of he's a decent margin behind him so far, at least. Maybe his progression ends up different. But for me so far, like with Lane, there's a level of high end play on every single shift that we saw in the NTDP. That was really difficult to ignore, and that's why you had him 11th overall in your draft year. That's looking pretty good, right?
Yeah, he's making me look smarter than I felt at the time with that pick. I didn't feel I felt like a bit of in no man's land with that one because
Yeah.
I think the only other person that had him top 20 was Scott Wheeler at 16.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, Lane's progressed extremely well, but I haven't seen the same things that made me feel comfortable being so bullish on Lane in Cole
Yeah.
Hutson's game. And I don't want to talk to death this comparison between brothers because Cole Hutson very much is his own player here as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's definitely some more question marks. But again, he's younger for the draft class. He plays a little bit of a different style. He's a bit more active in the neutral zone, whereas Lane was just a breakout artist, and then in the offensive zone, just has always just been going ham. And I
Yeah.
think Cole Hutson has slightly different strengths in that in those facets. But the comparison between like them both being like undersized left shot defensemen with high end offensive skills that they also try to leverage in similar ways makes that comparison a difficult one to avoid for us. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been interesting to kind of track how Cole Hutson has developed over the course of the last year and a half.
For sure. And I think, these two next elements are really what gives us the separation between the two. It's the habits and the decision making. For me, decision making wise, I actually like Cole Hutson's defensive decision making and awareness more than Lane's in his draft year. There's a forethought to his defensive interventions. He plays on the PK a decent amount this year for the NTDP. Well, at least he has in the games I've watched. And yeah, he's pretty good at defending the rush when he's in a situation where he's following the play, not leading it. And if he's back checking into his zone after an offensive incursion, and kind of heading back into his zone, kind of looking for the next play, he's not overskating lanes. He actually times his lanes really, really well on the back check and gets into the right lanes, puts his stick in the right lanes, and makes really great plays heading back in his zone. In zone, I feel like the issue is the tools limit him a lot. Whether that's defending the rush skating backwards or going from manning the net front to the corner as quickly as possible to retrieve a puck. Those are concerns for me, but it mainly has to do with the tools. It doesn't have to do with the decision making because his timing, his understanding of when to leave the crease to go to the corner, that kind of stuff is really, really good. He's a player who's limited by his tools, and I feel like you can work with that. Right,
For
like this
sure.
is a player who you can develop those elements, but also like the habits when it comes to retrievals, constantly scanning,
Yes.
constantly looking behind him, constantly evaluating options and figuring out what his next play is. He gets off the wall fairly quickly as well. He doesn't do it efficiently, but he does it as quickly as possible to avoid spending time in situations where he's going to get out muscled. Because again, he's 5'10", 159. Like he's not stout. He's fairly thin and lanky at this moment. But
Yeah.
again, there's room to grow with him, right?
For sure. Like I definitely think that retrievals is also another like a strong element in his game, as you mentioned, and he's so intelligent. Like the intelligence is one thing that I've kept coming back to over the course of the season, even though there have certainly been some frustrating viewings. That's not often been due to poor decision making. The decision making, whether it be on puck or off puck, offensively or defensively, has consistently been fairly sound in my viewings, and it gives him a strong foundation to also grow from. And it also makes me more hopeful in terms of him being trusted by his coaches at the NCAA level as soon as next season already, and being given those like power play reps and maybe like second pairing even strength minutes. I wouldn't be shocked at
Yeah.
BU. But yeah, like he's been a fascinating player to watch this season, but there's definitely been some really distinct strengths, as you mentioned, on retrievals and combining his skating and his passing ability to exploit passing lanes and create passing lanes on puck. So definitely a
Yeah.
lot to be intrigued by, but it hasn't exactly all come together just yet either. He's very raw still.
For sure, and that's a big part of the projection confusion with Cole Hutson. We'll get into that in just a second. In our third segment, we'll talk about the projection, the upside, and which team would be the best fit for Cole Hutson in order for him to develop into his maximum potential. But we'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors at Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish that you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, then Indeed is the best place to get that done. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't need to spend hours on multiple job sites looking for the perfect candidates with the right skills. Indeed's search system does all that for you. One of the best features about Indeed is Indeed matching. You can invite candidates to apply to your job posts with instant match, and they're 3 times more likely to apply than candidates who only see it by search, according to US based data. With Indeed, matching as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description. It's that easy. Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. And that's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must have job requirements. So visit indeed.com/locked on to get started right now. That's indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available to everyone. But if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, so moving on to our final segment, we'll be talking about Cole Hutson's projection. What's the best upside in this situation? What's the highest he could reach, and which team would be the best fit to help him reach that potential? We can start off with the projection because it's a bit all over the place. I think that realistically, if Cole Hutson doesn't really work out in the best way, and I feel like a lot needs to go right for him to work out at his best. If Cole Hutson just follows an average projection, I could very well see a third pair defenseman, kind of a second power play specialist, who plays in offensive scenarios, kind of your latter end of the career Eric Gustafson type of player. But there's a lot of possibilities for me with Cole Hutson. There's a chance he doesn't make the NHL. There's a chance he makes a second pair. There's a chance he makes a first pair. Like there's a lot of different possibilities with Cole Hutson. That's what makes him interesting, but also pretty risky, right?
For sure. Like I think at this stage, the most comfortable upside that I'd want to project would be like number three, offensive heavy, like left shot defenseman who's paired with like your typical defensively reliable right D, number four. But like the first pairing upside, I don't think I've fully seen in my viewings just yet, despite like how good the smarts are, just because the tools just don't quite match up to that level that I think would be necessary to unlock that type of upside. But that said, anything between a number three and like a non NHLer, I think is completely up for grabs here with his development. And that wide range of possibilities is one of the big reasons that I have absolutely no clue where he's actually going to end up being drafted, whether he be one of the last picks of the first round or fall all the way down to like the fourth round or something. I think any of
Yeah.
that is possible, and I can see why any of those outcomes would happen. But that said, like where would you like expect him to be drafted at the end of the day? Because it's kind of difficult to pin down here.
Yeah, so having been at the 2022 draft and having spoken with people that are well connected with NHL teams, including an NHL scout, what happened on draft day with Lane Hutson is that every team was looking at each other, being like, "Who's going to pull the trigger? Who's going to do this?" And that's why he ended up slipping the 62nd, where the Habs picked him. I feel like we could see a very similar scenario with Cole Hutson, where he does end up slipping to the third or fourth round, because with Cole, it's the thing is, teams might have learned from Lane, right? They might have looked at Lane Hutson's projection so far, his progression over the years, and been like, okay, we can't make the same mistake again. So he might be like 15th on one board for an NHL team, and like off like fully off the list on another. That's the thing with Cole, is like it depends who you ask, right? So like I feel like maybe there's one team that'll have him in like their top 10 or top 15 on their personal board and will want to pick him up with their first round pick, let's say a late first rounder. Um, but for me, if he's not gone by the end of the first round, he might slip to the third or fourth. I don't think he doesn't really scream second round pick the way that Lane Hutson does. Like Lane Hutson should not have slipped that far. I feel like with Cole, it's like I see him as a second round pick. I see him as a 35 to 45 guy. But I don't know where teams stand on that, and I feel like teams are either much higher than I am or much lower than I am on him. But I don't think anyone's like with me on this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. I get it.
Yeah, no, exactly. So in terms of upside, yeah, I see the first pair upside, but it's very, very faint and very, a lot of things need to go right. I was on the same page as you before the Five Nations. When I saw Cole Hutson at the Five Nations, I was like, oh man, there's something here. Like he has the hockey sense is off the charts. The awareness,
Yeah.
especially offensively, is ridiculous, and I feel like that could be his ticket to the next level. In terms of the tools, like sure, but if Cole Hutson grows 2-3 inches, if he adds 20, 30 pounds of weight, if he becomes even more skilled and works on those skills intricately, which I feel like he's going to get a lot of reps to do that. Like he's going to get a lot of offensive zone puck touches, regardless.
Yeah.
And especially with BU, once Lane Hutson graduates, which will probably be this summer, like there's a spot there for Cole Hutson. There's a long-term spot with him on a pair with Tom Verlander, who kind of fits exactly
Not
what
bad.
you were describing in terms of a
Precisely.
more shutdown, more defensive right D. Like there's a spot for him
Mobile.
there. Yeah, no, exactly. So I feel like that's a perfect seat for Cole Hutson to flourish and develop into his full potential. So I wouldn't count out the top pair potential, but like I said, it's very faint. It's very distant. A lot of things need to go right.
Theoretical.
Exactly. So in terms of best fit, who do you see as kind of great potential fits for Cole Hutson in terms of teams that could maximize his potential, help him reach his full upside? Like, which teams could unlock that top pair potential for him?
Well, the funniest one would be the Montreal Canadiens, obviously. That would just be very funny, like because they
Yeah, it would
obviously
be
need more
hilarious.
left shot defensemen, as we know,
Oh
in their
yeah, no,
prospect
definitely.
pool. Yeah, but like in all, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that ended up happening with like a third round draft pick, because the Habs have a bunch of picks this year. But I
Yeah,
could see a team like the Carolina Hurricanes be interested. They're always kind of keeping their eyes open for like high end, underrated, undersized offensive players. And Cole
yeah,
Hutson certainly fits into that boat. And I mean, they already just went out and signed like Bradley Nadeau, who they picked up in the first round last year out
hmm.
of the like what AJHL or was BCHL or no, it was
It was a
BCHL. Yeah,
BCHL. Yeah.
Penticton.
Hmm.
And 10 months later, he has an NHL contract. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if it's like Carolina. I'd be very shocked if it were a team like the New York Islanders. Not to crack another
Yeah,
Islanders joke twice in a week here, but
he's not their guy.
yeah, it's
He's just
not
not
it's
their guy.
not going to be Lou Lamoriello. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Like, what teams stand out for you? Because I feel like I'm drawing a blank beyond those like pretty obvious potential destinations.
Carolina for me for sure. So the thing is, I know for a fact, like a good friend of ours, like my old boss actually works for the Carolina Hurricanes, as a scout, and he told me like the Canes had their eye on Lane Hutson. They were just waiting for him to drop a couple more spots, and they would have taken him. So he's definitely like their type of player, and I don't think the Canes have anyone in their decor that fits that mold. Like I don't think they have anyone on their roster that is an undersized, really intelligent offensive defenseman. They don't have that. They have a bunch of bigger guys, and I feel like they could afford to take a risk on him in the kind of mid rounds and kind of see where he
Yeah.
goes. Outside of that, I feel like Toronto could use more offense from the back end. Like I know they've been going for more and more big guys, but if you're adding Cade Weber, you can tip the balance the other side a bit and go for Cole Hutson. Like that's fine. But yeah, I feel like the LA Kings could use a guy like him as well. A bona fide power play quarterback who can play on either one of their two top units and kind of man that element in 5 years when Brent Clark has reached his potential, when Drew Doughty's out of the league. There's going to be a spot for him moving forward, right? So that's another team. So yeah, for me, it's between the Canes, the Kings, and the Leafs. I think those three teams could use a player like that. But honestly, I'm looking at a lot of decors around the league, and a lot of teams are missing this type of player. And I feel like contenders need that kind of player, like that offensive dynamo, that intelligent presence from the back end who constantly creates offensively. Like it's important. So I could see that happening. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next and what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to leave us a rate and review. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of April. This has been Haddock Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.